He stumbled out of the jungle barefoot, mud up to his knees, a length of chain still hanging from his ankle. 20 meters away, a line of soldiers spun around and swung their rifles straight at his chest. "Rehain," he screamed, "hostage." For 1 second, no one moved. For the next, he was sure they were going to shoot. 9 weeks earlier, he'd been a normal engineer on a routine road inspection. What happened between those two moments is one of the most extreme survival stories to ever come out of the South American jungle. If you like real, true survival stories like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Early 2000s. A South American country gutted by civil war. Daniel was an engineer for an international aid organization. On paper, his job was simple: keep remote bridges, roads, and water systems alive so isolated communities didn't collapse. To do that, he had to drive the kind of roads everyone in that country knew could get you killed. Some routes were marked red zones. After dark, you avoided them. On certain stretches, guerrilla groups, not the government, owned the hills. Kidnapping was just another line of income. The map says road. Locals say, don't go after dark. And the people with guns are the ones who really own it. One clear morning, Daniel left a mid-sized city in a 4x4 with a local driver. The plan was simple. Visit a cluster of villages. Inspect a washed-out bridge. Talk to community leaders. Be back by evening. They rolled out of the city. Asphalt turned to graded dirt. Jungle rose on both sides, thick, tall, close enough to touch from the window. They passed a motorcycle here, an overloaded bus there. A few kilometers past a small town, they rounded a bend. Ahead, cones on the road, a stopped truck, a few men in work clothes. It looked like a road repair crew. The driver eased off the gas. Then the workers raised their rifles. On that bend, in those few seconds, Daniel's life split into before and after. It happened fast. Men in camouflage and rubber boots stepped out from behind the truck and from the trees. Bandanas covered their faces. One walked straight up to the hood, pointed his rifle through the windshield, and shouted for them to get out. The driver tried to say something. A rifle butt smashed into his shoulder and dropped him to his knees. Daniel put his hands up, heart pounding. All the security briefings he'd ever sat through boiled down to 3 rules. Don't argue. Don't run. Stay calm. They were shoved to the side of the road. One gunman tore through the truck, papers, tools, bags flung into the dust. Another patted them down, took phones, wallets, ID cards. Within minutes, plastic cord bit into Daniel's wrists behind his back. His own tie, or a strip of cloth, was yanked over his eyes. A voice behind him barked a single word. "Come on. Walk." He stumbled off the road and into the bush, blind. He had no idea that the next time he stood on a road, he'd be half-starved, wrapped in a filthy blanket, begging armed strangers not to shoot him. Right now, all he could feel was mud under his shoes, branches hitting his face, and the muzzle of a rifle somewhere behind his spine. Blindfolded, the jungle becomes something you feel more than see. Roots caught his feet, vines dragged at his legs, thorns tore his sleeves. The air grew hotter and wetter as they left the open sky behind and followed a narrow footpath into deeper green. At first, he tried to track everything. The tilt of the ground, where the sun burned on his neck, how often they turned. Shock and fear turned all of that into noise. After an hour, his inner compass was gone. He could have been walking in circles. They marched for hours. Finally, hands pushed him to a stop. The blindfold lifted just enough for him to see. Mud boots, rifle barrels. Through a curtain of leaves, he caught broken glimpses of tarps and smoke. A hidden camp. This, he would learn, was a jungle base used by a guerrilla front to hold hostages, rest fighters, and move supplies. The driver was separated from him almost immediately. Daniel never saw him again. The camp sat on a ridge, chosen for survival, not his. Below, a river carved through the valley, its growl masked by insects. Above, the hill rose higher, a lookout if helicopters came. Around them, forests stretched in every direction. From the air, it was just more green. The setup was crude but efficient. Blue and black plastic tarps stretched over poles. Hammocks and pallets made of split logs. Cooking fires ringed with rocks. A couple of rough tables with radios and folded maps. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and diesel. That smell would follow him for years. They chained him by the ankle to a sapling under a tarp at the edge of camp, far enough out of the way, but always in a guard's line of sight. His entire world shrank to the clothes on his back, an old army blanket, a plastic cup. They gave him a nickname, not his real name. Among them, hostages rarely had proper identities. It was easier that way if things didn't work out. They told him who they were, a leftist guerrilla group fighting the state, funded in part by ransom kidnappings. They told him his organization would be contacted. They told him to cooperate. They told him, very plainly, "We're not going to kill you unless they try to rescue you." It wasn't comfort, it was a reminder. So he started to understand. His life now depended on people and decisions far outside that ridge, people he couldn't see, in rooms he'd never enter. Camp life had a pattern. Before dawn, guard changes, whispers, the smell of instant coffee boiling in blackened pots. Morning, patrols leaving, boots on paths, occasional gunshots in the distance. Midday, heavy heat, sticky quiet, voices from the radio. Afternoon, chopping wood, cleaning weapons, patching clothes. Night, smoke, cooking, political speeches, card games, tinny music. For Daniel, all those moving parts meant only one thing: time passing. His days were measured by food. Morning, a mug of sweet black coffee, and a piece of stale bread or arepa. Later, a bowl of rice and beans. If he was lucky, a scrap of plantain or a sliver of meat. Water came in a plastic jug. He rationed it without thinking. Under escort, he used a rough latrine and once in a while washed in a muddy stream, his ankle chain clinking with every move. He slept badly. Nights in the jungle are loud. Frogs throb like engines. Crickets scream. Large animals move through the undergrowth, snapping branches. Sometimes distant explosions rolled over the hills, reminders that this wasn't just wilderness. It was a live war zone. He wore the same clothes for weeks. Sweat, mud, and mildew turned them stiff and sour. Mosquitoes fed on any exposed skin. Tiny cuts bloomed into infected sores and angry rashes that never went away. The rope and chain around his ankle chewed the skin to blisters, then open wounds. Each day they tightened it just a little. When it looked particularly bad, they dug out a communal first aid box, a couple of antibiotic pills, some cream. Not kindness, maintenance. Alive, he was money. Dead, he was a problem. This is the part most people don't see in hostage stories. Not the violence, but the boredom, the itching rashes, the slow grinding down of who you think you are. And if you let that grind win, you don't need a bullet to die in a place like this. If you want more survival stories that show this side of captivity, the slow grind, not just the headline, hit subscribe. That's what this channel is for. One night, lying awake with his ankle burning and mosquitoes whining in his ears, Daniel realized something terrifying. The jungle was attacking his body. His captors were attacking his mind. There were obvious fears. That his employer couldn't or wouldn't pay. That the army would hit the camp and he'd die in the crossfire. That a fever or a snakebite would kill him faster than any bullet. But the worst enemy was uncertainty. He didn't know where he was, how far from a road or a town, whether anyone was searching in the right valley, or whether this would end in weeks, months, or never. So he pushed back with the only weapons he had, routine and attention. He broke the day into tiny tasks, stretching and simple exercises, even while chained, just to feel his own muscles working. Cleaning his cup, his blanket, the small patch of ground around him. Tracing patterns in the beams above his head. Reciting from memory any poem, song, or book fragment he could still pull out of his mind. He counted insects and gave them names. He learned the camp's sound map. Which hammock squeaked. Which guard coughed at night. Who dragged their feet on patrol. He listened whenever guards talked near him. Certain words kept popping up. La familia, the family. La plata, the money. La negociación, the negotiation. He could feel his fate being shuffled back and forth in conversations he couldn't quite follow. He also talked carefully to his captors. Not about ideology. Their speeches about revolution and justice just made him angry. Instead, he asked where they grew up, what football teams they supported, what music they missed from the cities, who they hadn't seen in years. Some were barely older than him. One had joined at 13. Another hadn't seen his mother in half a decade. He didn't start rooting for them. This wasn't Stockholm Syndrome. But seeing them as human did two important things. It kept him from going numb. And it helped him read them, who followed rules, who cut corners, who slipped when they were tired. At night he prayed. Raised Catholic, he whispered the Lord's Prayer, less to ask for a miracle, more to remind himself there was still a world beyond tarps, mud, and rifles. The camp's window to the outside was small, a cheap transistor radio and a shortwave set. Whenever they switched it on, Daniel leaned closer, pretending not to. He heard bombings in towns he recognized by name, governum, and offensives against illegal armed groups in the region. Occasional mention of foreign hostages and negotiations. One day, he heard his own case referenced, an engineer taken on a rural road, international pressure mounting. Somewhere out there, his family was fighting through bureaucracies. His employer was on calls with security teams. His name was on lists he'd never see. Another day, the voice on the radio mentioned a major military operation in the area. Helicopters, troops, air raids. Almost immediately, the camp commander reacted. They moved. Daniel's chain was loosened, then clamped. He was half dragged through the forest as the entire camp relocated. New ridge, new river, new tarps, then again, and again. Each move gave him clues. The sound of different rivers. Steeper or gentler slopes. Variations in bird calls. But it also tore apart any mental map he tried to build. He had no way to know if each step was taking him nearer to a road, or burying him deeper in guerrilla territory. One thing did become obvious. The guerrillas were getting more tired, more jumpy. More talk of informants and air raids. Tighter guard rotations. Shorter tempers. And tired guards make mistakes. Daniel started quietly preparing for the one mistake he needed. From early on, he'd made himself a promise. If a real chance comes, I take it, no matter what. That did not mean sprinting into the trees at the first impulse. That would just get him killed in the first 30 seconds. It meant waiting for a perfect storm. The right weather. The right terrain. The right guard. And a body just barely strong enough to move. So he watched. He learned. Which guards clung to their rifles even when bored, and which stared into space. Which nights the rain came down hardest and washed everything clean. Exactly how his chain was fixed. Rope to stake, stake to mud where it creaked, where it didn't. Quietly, he tested limits. A slight nudge to feel if the stake wobbled. A cautious tug on the rope. Once, a failed attempt to saw a thread with a sharp stone, abandoned when he realized the damage would show. Every night, tiny experiments. Every night, rehearsal. 9 weeks is just a number when you read it. Living it, time shrinks to hours and heartbeats. Around that point, the rainy season deepened. Storms hit harder, lasted longer. Soon, almost every afternoon exploded into thunder and mud. The guards grew more confident that he wouldn't try to run. He was the quiet hostage, furniture. His ankle, once an open wound, had sealed into a stiff, angry scar. It still hurt, but it could take his weight. Then one day, thick clouds boiled up over the hills. The air went heavy, still, electric. Even before the first raindrop fell, he felt it. Tonight might be it. If you're still here with him in this storm, you'll probably want to subscribe. This channel is full of true escapes just like this. It began as a distant grumble. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old iron. Birds screamed overhead, then cut off, like someone had thrown a switch. Then the storm hit. Rain hammered the tarps so hard the whole camp vibrated. Wind snapped plastic sheets. Lightning strobed through the trees, turning the world into broken black and white flashes. Rifles against a trunk. Hammocks swinging wild. Faces lit in harsh white, then swallowed by darkness. That night his guard was a young man they called Carlos, thin, restless, famously lazy when the weather went bad. As the light bled out of the sky, Carlos pulled his poncho tight and edged closer to the central fire, away from the cold spray of rain blowing in under Daniel's tarp. It was a small change. But for the first time in weeks, Daniel was slightly outside the guard's comfortable cone of vision. Water flooded the ground around the stake that anchored his ankle. The soil turned to soup. Each gust of wind made the wood tremble just a little. He waited until the storm was roaring at full power. Then slowly, he slid his hand down to the rope. It was slick. His fingers were numb. He found the stake where it vanished into the mud. He started to twist it, millimeter by millimeter. Every time thunder cracked overhead, he turned it a fraction more, hiding the tiny creak of wood in wet soil under the roar. Try to imagine doing that, knowing that if a board guard glances your way at the wrong second, you die. Minutes stretched. Lightning exploded. For a heartbeat, everything was daylight. He froze. Carlos glanced over, saw the same hunched blanket-wrapped shape he'd seen for weeks, and turned back to the fire. Another roll of thunder, another twist. Suddenly, the stake moved more freely. He pulled. It rose an inch, then another. Not all the way out, but enough to give his rope more slack than he'd ever had before. He began working the rope over his heel, then his toes. Every instinct screamed, kick it off and run. He didn't. He forced himself to move in slow motion, each motion timed with the loudest thud. Lord! Finally, the rope slid off his ankle. Technically, he was free. But if he moved too soon, one lazy glance from Carlos would turn that freedom into a death sentence. He stayed exactly where he was, blanket up around his shoulders, copying his old posture. The storm raged. The fire popped. Voices mumbled around the camp. 5 long minutes crawled past. Then, in a moment between lightning flashes, as a huge gust sent sparks flying from the fire and every head turned toward it, he rolled silently off his pallet and vanished under the nearest bush. No shout. No alarm. He crawled, elbows and knees in the mud, face in wet leaves, moving in short, desperate bursts whenever thunder was loudest, freezing when it dipped. He headed downhill, away from the glow of the fire, away from voices, away from 9 weeks of captivity. Behind him, the rain went on wiping out his tracks almost as soon as he made them. Beyond the ring of firelight, the jungle closed around him like a fist. In a storm at night, the forest is a black maze. Trees are just darker shadows. The ground drops away without warning. Every step can be a fall, a twisted ankle, or worse. He had 2 jobs now. Put as much distance between himself and the camp as he could before dawn. Stay quiet enough not to draw attention. He slipped and crashed into unseen trunks. More than once he slid down muddy slopes out of control. At one point, he grabbed for a branch and felt something muscular and cold writhe under his fingers. A snake. By some miracle, it shot away instead of striking. He pushed on. Gradually, the sounds of the camp faded, the murmur of voices, the crackle of a fire. The storm and the forest took over completely. None of that mattered now. Right now there was only mud, gravity, and a faint sound he focused on with everything he had. Water. He followed it. He knew one simple rule: rivers lead to people. They might lead to a village, a road, a military patrol, or straight back into guerrilla territory. But staying near water gave him 2 vital advantages. Something to drink, and a constant roar to hide his own noise. By the time the sky lightened, he was miles from where he'd started, shivering, caked in mud, his feet torn and blistered. He didn't stop. He knew the guerrillas would discover his empty pallet at first light. They'd send trackers. If they had dogs, they'd be faster than him. His only chance was to keep moving, and whenever he could, cross ground that killed tracks, rocky patches, streams, bare roots. He walked for 2 days. He ate almost nothing. A few wild fruits he recognized, thin palm hearts hacked off with a broken branch. He drank straight from the river. Old sores reopened. His ankle screamed with every step. Leeches clung to his legs and dropped off, leaving slow bleeds. But after 9 weeks chained to a stake, every step in any direction felt like taking his life back in pieces. On the 3rd day, over the river's noise, he heard something new. Engines. Not in the sky, on the ground. He froze. Engines here meant one of 2 things. Guerrilla vehicles. Or government forces. Both carried rifles. Both were used to ambushes. In his state, wild-eyed, filthy, barefoot, either side could see him as a threat. He moved towards the sound anyway, slowly, low through the undergrowth. The noise grew louder, then he saw it. A muddy road hacked through the jungle. A cluster of old 4x4. Men in uniforms. The way they stood, the way they carried their rifles, different from his captors. Soldiers. He stepped out of the trees, with his hands raised high. Rehain, he shouted, voice cracking, hostage. Rifles swung toward him. Orders snapped through the air. For one terrible moment he thought this was where it ended, shot down in front of his own rescue. He fell to his knees. Seconds passed, then soldiers closed in, shouting questions. One threw a blanket over his shoulders. Someone pressed a plastic bottle of water into his hands. He drank like he was drowning. A radio crackled. Somewhere up the chain, a voice reported that an escaped hostage had just walked out of the trees. For the first time in 9 weeks, he was no longer a prisoner. But the jungle wasn't finished with him yet, not really. Getting out was only the start of a different kind of survival. If you're interested in what happens after the headline, how people live with stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. The next weeks blurred. He cycled between hospitals, safe houses, and windowless offices. Doctors treated infections and skin diseases, malnutrition, the mess his ankle had become. Security services debriefed him for hours. Where the camp had been, how many fighters he'd seen, what radio calls he'd overheard, the routes they'd taken when they moved. Psychologists tried to help him reconnect the person who'd left the city that morning with the one who'd crawled through the mud under a tarp night after night. Meanwhile, somewhere back in the hills, negotiations his ransom, already underway, suddenly went nowhere. The guerrilla front that had held him had to explain how they'd let a valuable hostage walk out in a rainstorm. Some guards were punished. Others vanished into other units. The war rolled on. In time, Daniel did something that shocked people who only knew the headlines. He went back to work. But everything changed. No more quick solo trips through red zones. No more casual decisions to stretch a schedule. Routes were debated, checked, cleared, escorted. He talked publicly about his captivity only a handful of times. When he did, he came back to 2 ideas. How ordinary many of his captors were. Kids from poor villages with bad options, recruited young into a brutal system. And how thin the line is between being a professional on a mission and being a hostage, chained to a post, waiting for strangers in far-off rooms to decide if you live or die. Here's what 9 weeks in a jungle prison really teach you about survival. 1. The jungle is both prison and shield. It hides you from rescue as well as it hides your captors. Trees, rivers, and mud don't care who's good or bad. They just swallow people. 2. Your body can be controlled. Your mind is the last border. Your captors control your food, your movement, your sleep. But if you can decide what to focus on, how to structure your day inside your own head, you keep a piece of yourself no guard can reach. In any crisis, that's the last border you never want to surrender. 3. Tiny habits are acts of defiance. Cleaning a wound, stretching your legs, rationing water, these aren't just practical. They're how you tell yourself, I am still here. I'm not just something chained to a tree. They're how you defend that mental border day after day. 4. Escape is almost never Hollywood. No big shootouts, no slow-motion heroics, just waiting, watching, testing a stake in the ground every night to see if it moves 1 extra millimeter, and then moving when the moment finally comes. 5. Luck only helps if you're ready. Daniel was lucky a storm hit like it did. Lucky his guard stepped a few meters closer to the fire. Lucky the first armed men he saw wore government uniforms. But if he hadn't, strengthened his body as best he could, learned his guards' routines, tested his chain night after night, that storm would have just been more rain on plastic. For 9 weeks, he woke and slept knowing his life rested on conversations he couldn't hear, deals he couldn't see, and men with rifles who barely knew his real name. When the jungle finally gave him a crack in that wall, he took it. This account is based on composite details from multiple documented hostage cases in South American jungle conflicts in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, especially kidnappings by guerrilla groups like the FARC and ELN in Colombia. The roadside abduction, jungle camps, and improvised escapes all come from real testimonies and reports. Names, locations, and identifying details have been changed or blended for privacy and clarity. If this story pulled you into that jungle for a few minutes, if you could almost hear the rain on the tarps and feel the chain on his ankle, hit like. It tells me to keep making more of these. And if you want more real accounts of humans pushed to the edge in jungles, mountains, ice, even space, subscribe to the channel. There are many more journeys like this waiting to be told.